Hey, good morning. My name is Pete Fletcher, and welcome to the webcast for VMware Cloud Foundation, starting with vSAN. I'm joined with my partner in crime, my co-host from the Virtually Speaking podcast, Mr. John Nicholson. John, what's up, buddy?
Doing well, Pete. Doing well.
Ready to do some VMware Cloud Foundation starts with vSAN?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right, sweet. Well, for those of you that don't know us, John and I work in the Storage and Availability Business Unit, or now known the Hyper-Converged Infrastructure Business Unit. But yeah, we are vSAN guys. And we're pretty excited today to talk about something that may be new to you, and that is VMware Cloud Foundation. And it's a little bit of a spin. We're actually going to talk about what some of the traditional challenges are with data center infrastructure and how everyone tries to modernize their data centers. But then we're going to talk about how VMware Cloud Foundation can address a lot of the existing or traditional pain points. And then we're gonna shift gears and start focusing on one of the key pillars of this VMware Cloud Foundation solution, and that is vSAN. So we're gonna talk about what vSAN is. We're gonna get a little deeper and talk about some of the operations and supportability. We're definitely gonna save time for questions, and if we do have time, we'll see. But we might actually have a live video for you, but that's to be determined. If you have any questions, be sure to throw them in the chat. We've got some really big brains that are standing by to answer any questions as we start to go through this presentation. Yeah. So with that, let's get started. John, I don't know about you, but it doesn't matter where I am. I see new examples of technology, of innovation, just changing the way we do things, whether it's at work or whether I'm not working. I mean, just a couple of examples. Every event we go to, we're in Ubers, paying with our smartphones. We're getting to a conference and we're using a web app that's got all the information. As soon as we finish our sessions, we're getting live voting that tells us how bad we are of speakers, and then
Maybe bad
and then
how
even
bad you are. So
well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my favorite one so far has been the short bald guy. He's funny. Yeah, that was the whole feedback I got. But even when I'm not at work, like I was at a tournament this weekend for my daughter's speech and debate conference, and we were tooling around this little city in South Carolina, and we hop on this this trolley, and the whole schedule's on a trolley app where I can see through GPS all these different locations of the different trolleys, and that's basically, that's technology at work. That's innovations. There's an edge device somewhere that's tracking all of these buses by GPS and sending that information up and providing it to me on my phone. So many different areas, whether you're using mobile banking to transfer money to pay for your daughter's college, whether you're whether you're at the doctor getting a checkup, or some of the other areas that I'm less familiar with, like the farming industry is now like using drones to get real data about analytics about crops to actually improve their crops. So lots of really cool things, but the key component here is that there's a lot of new devices that are out there. John, I just recently heard your doorbell ring, and it was like a robot talking at your house saying, "Someone is at the front door." There's so many IoT devices out there. And so, yeah, but companies are learning to make our lives better. But the consumer expectation is that these devices are always online. And there are so many different ways. But one thing for sure is all these companies, they have different specific challenges in their industries, but they all have similar strategies and similar goals. They want to be competitive. They want to have some differentiation with their products. They need to create some sort of unique value. And of course, they want to be profitable, but they need to make sure that they have lasting success. And these goals are, the world is changing quickly, as we see. A lot of people were on premises, and then all of a sudden there was a big shift to the cloud, which is still a good thing, has different values, but then also, edge devices, the edge is becoming also more popular these days. And so one thing for sure, while companies may have different strategies and different similar goals, they need the old traditional infrastructures that are complex. They're just not going to be able to handle all this new change and be able to support all of this innovation. And with that, we need a standardized, automated, dependable infrastructure that's scalable, that's going to be efficient, that's going to save us money, that's going to reduce our costs, but also increase our revenue. And it's no doubt that HCI is becoming so popular these days because it is that. It's that scalable infrastructure. It's cost effective. It gets all the performance that you need. We're going to dive more into vSAN specifically about the HCI, but these are the things that nowadays, as all these demands happen, the old way of doing business just doesn't work. And here's an example of that. Some traditional challenges that we've all seen. Anybody who's a data center administrator, I'm sure, has seen a similar scenario that I'm about to walk through. And I'll tell you this: the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but this is a real environment. So here's a traditional environment. A while back they were running ESX 5.0. They had just one cluster. They had 4 hosts. Pretty standard. And then the boss comes to the IT manager and says, "Hey, we need more capacity." Right. Well, that's a pretty standard request. I don't think most people on this call have probably had a similar, request. And so what do? Well, you start, you go ahead and get another cluster involved, but now there's a different version, right? So you want to upgrade to 5.0, you update 2. We don't need to update the next host. We can do that later. But now we've got 2 different clusters, right? And then the boss comes in and says, "Well, that's great, but we just merged with ABC Corp. And ABC Corp has its own stuff that we need to get in there." And it's like, okay, well, this gets slightly complex, as you can see on the right. The admin management time, the complexity is going to start to rise here, because we're going to have another cluster in here that's going to support this new M&A. We're going to install the latest version of vSphere that now comes with SSO. And we're getting it's getting a little bit more complex. So we might even hire an architect, a consultant, if you will, to help me design this new infrastructure. So things start to get slightly more complex as the environment starts to grow. But life moves on. The business comes back and says, "Hey, guess what? We bought a new business, and they've got their own needs. We need to make sure that this new business, their application is performant. We need to make sure that we have the resources for that." Right? All right. So now we're getting a slightly more complex. So we now have to add another cluster. We're running out of rack space, so now we've got more complex network configuration involved. We're adding more space involved, and they said it needs to be more performant, right? So we've got our 6.0 environment that's going to support this new application, but we're going to now also have to, we hire a consultant that's going to help us to install VROps, and we want to make sure that this thing is getting the greatest performance. Right. So certainly
Pete,
Go ahead.
Pete, I also noticed there that the SAN storage, they're just slowly multiplying. We had 1, then we had 2 because of the different silos. Then like a third one appeared out of nowhere. Like these things, they're like rabbits, just popping up little more islands of storage in our data center.
That's exactly right, John, because that's as we start to grow, and at the same time, we were like, we're not going to take stuff offline, so we're going to buy more storage, and we're going to set up a new cluster here, and we want to migrate storage. But then it starts to get to a point where some of the storage gets old. The older stuff. Now I get back to where I was. Some of our storage is getting old, so we want to actually, make sure that it's faster. So we're going to buy flash, we're going to get better media because it's getting slightly cheaper. But it gets complex, right? And so the boss is saying, "Hey, we want to start doing some of our own DevOps. We've got new flash devices in there. We need to speed up our troubleshooting as well because things just aren't getting fixed quick enough." Right. And so what do? Well, we're gonna add some more. We're gonna add another cluster that's going to support all this new DevOps work. But we're also going to set up an area for log insight, so we can start making sure that we can have our active troubleshooting. But now we've got complexity, right? We've got several different versions of vSphere. We've got networking complexity. We've got all different types of storage, and all of this has to be maintained, and obviously it's going to need to be updated. So things are getting pretty complex.
Like rack Jenga. This looks like we're playing rack Jenga. Like we've got these different versions, and we're like, okay, where do we put this cluster? Oh, there's 12U over there. And how does the cable? I'm sure at this point the cabling has become a complete disaster, and looks like my cable closet here of, just randomly running things between racks.
Oh, you got that right. And then your boss goes to VMworld, and he hears all these really cool things, and he comes back and he goes, "Hey, I wanna modernize my data center, and so we need to start upgrading some stuff. And and cloud, I want cloud. It reminds me of like a Dilbert cartoon, but yeah, like everybody wants to be upgraded. Everybody wants to be in the cloud, right? So these are some of the frustrations or the complexities that a lot of the data center administrators are experiencing in traditional infrastructure. I mean, this is a real example here of 10 different versions of vSphere in one environment, and then the uptime on some of these servers, are almost 2,000 days of uptime. So yeah, getting all of this stuff patched and up to date and current and just even managed, just day two operations in general are, this is the traditional pain points that we're seeing in today's environments. I mean, this is obviously why a lot of people are moving to cloud, because of the simplicity of cloud, right?
Well, and I love how you mentioned the uptime, because back in the day, these Unix admins would brag like, 4,000 days of uptime. The server got, a wall got built around it, and we forgot it existed, but it's still online. Like, but the modern challenges now is there's security patches, and there's these things like these CPU attacks. So even if the hypervisor is pretty hardened, you still got to worry about these speculative attacks and other things. You guys really need to be patching hosts on at least a quarterly basis at a minimum, if not, monthly. And how do you do that when you've got 10 different versions, you've got different management planes, different SSO environments? That's a problem.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then so, you start to say, well, what are we going to do to modernize? We want to keep up. There's a lot of devices that we're trying to get access to into our environment, but we need to upgrade. So are we going to stick with a private cloud? Are we going to a public cloud? Completely to a public cloud? Like, what is the best option? Certainly there are advantages to both, right? I mean, on premises, yeah. I mean, it's made for, it's definitely like a cost-effective way to handle your applications, especially if they don't have to be constantly spun up or spun down. I mean, obviously for a lot of organizations, it's the choice because of the IT governance. It's a great solution for deploying to edge because we've already got our private cloud. But then you look at public cloud. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to public cloud because it's incredibly flexible, it's incredibly scalable. We can do cloud bursting. If we don't always need the same amount of resources, we can burst. It's made for a lot of these new agile apps. And then it's completely automated, right? So I don't have to babysit it. I don't have to worry about, what version is this? Is it being, there's a lot of simplicity when it comes to having a service versus managing a complete infrastructure. So there are some benefits to both. Do you agree, John?
I definitely agree. It's a hybrid cloud future. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So the choice is not so much do we go hybrid or do we go public. 71% of folks are actually going hybrid because it makes sense, to have some of your work on premises, and it does make and for certain applications or even certain pieces of an application, components of an application might actually be in a cloud. So it really depends on the workload. But the truth is that most organizations are moving to a hybrid cloud model. Customers that we talk to at VMware, when they're telling us about like what they need and what their strategy is, it's basically they want any device, which means it can be their traditional workstations, but also any device in the field, phones, all cameras, etc., Internet of Things. They want it to be they need to have their any application, and a lot of the traditional networks are having to they're being overburdened with all of this extra traffic and all of this unique traffic coming in for their networking, and so having their network and their security up to date is a big concern. And then lastly, as we already talked about, this journey to the cloud. Hybrid cloud is definitely the goal. We've got edge computing requirements for a lot of organizations. There are some public cloud resources, and the goal would be to be able to have this, as we said earlier, this dependable, this scalable, this secure, this automated, and this standardized infrastructure that can be put on any cloud. And so that any device, that any application, that any cloud is sort of the vision of VMware Cloud Foundation. All right, and those are the different things that organizations need for their infrastructure, and that's essentially what VMware Cloud Foundation is providing to customers. We're gonna touch a little bit on actually how VMware Cloud Foundation does that. right? So that, like I said, that goal of any device, any application, and any cloud, that's kind of why we built VMware Cloud Foundation in the first place. What it is, it's a simple path to the hybrid cloud through a fully integrated hybrid cloud platform. Now that platform is essentially, it's combining all of the components that VMware, that you may even be familiar with already from VMware, right? The compute and storage, beautiful vSAN that we're going to talk about, the networking, NSX, but more than that, we also have complete lifecycle automation and security, all wrapped in, all managed by one component that is VMware Cloud Foundation. But the beauty of that is it makes managing your data center fundamentally simpler, because it's taking that ease of automation and that you get from a public cloud, it takes it in-house. And so that same ease of automation you're actually getting using VMware Cloud Foundation. But you don't lose out on the security and all those other things, because it's end-to-end security, from the networking, using microsegmentation, all the way down to the storage, using encryption on vSAN. And so it's a solution that really manages your entire environment. But it doesn't matter if you're managing it yourself, like you've got your own private cloud or hybrid cloud, but you also can do this in a public cloud offering. So you can have, VMware Cloud on AWS, IBM, Rackspace, and others. And so all of this can be managed through VMware Cloud Foundation. So traditional pain points that we talked about in the beginning, all answered by VMware Cloud Foundation. And how does VMware Cloud Foundation do that? Well, they start with something that, if you're not familiar with, you should definitely research, and that is the standardized architecture is all being done through VMware's validated design program. So anything that's in VMware Cloud Foundation has been tested, has been certified, and it's going to work, right? It's been tested and it's proved to work. But then it's all being deployed on an integrated stack that's just known, right? It's on trusted vSphere, it's on vSAN, and it's on NSX. Right, and we're using VROps to do all of the automation and all of the management. So this is a product suite, if you will, that's being all pulled together with VMware Cloud Foundation. That's completely, it's a simple management interface because it's using this SDDC manager. Now, the one thing I don't want you to misunderstand here is that this is not just a bundle of products, right? Because you could do that yourself, right? You could take all of these products and set them up yourself if you want. That's not what SDDC Manager is. SDDC Manager is actually a program that's been tested with all of this software, and it actually completely automates from day 0 all the way to day 2 the entire management, the deployment, and the day 2 operations, all of the configuration. It manages everything, policy-based provisioning, scaling, and all of that stuff, in addition to all of the upgrades that you're going to need to do in your environment. So this really is a soup to nuts complete solution that's taking the best of breed at VMware, aligning it with our validated designs, and really bringing just a next generation solution. And as we mentioned, a big part of that is the storage of vSAN. And so for the rest of this conversation, we want to focus on how vSAN specifically is really contributing to the success of this VMware Cloud Foundation solution. So John, why don't we start diving a little bit deeper into how vSAN contributes to VMware Cloud Foundation?
Yeah, so let me get started by saying that really I view HCI as the foundation of the software-defined data center of this full stack that we're trying to deliver. And really, when you look at vCloud Foundation, the core thing that everyone's going to have is a hypervisor, and then for your basic functionality like vMotion, HA, and things like that, you're going to need shared storage. I mean, that's just life's pretty boring if you don't have vMotion or HA. Patching is going to be incredibly disruptive. You're going to have islands of compute everywhere. Every host will be its own little island. That would take you back 15 years to the Stone Ages, really. And so we start with hyper-converged infrastructure. We start with the compute and the storage, and to a certain degree, the networking is coming more and more into this. And then we build on top of that, and we have the monitoring. We have got the additional, the life cycle, the ability to deploy. One of the cool things with VCF I found out recently is you can actually deploy even horizons. You feed it your Windows images, you feed it your VDI installers, and so boom, VDI environment. So it's look at it not only as a product existing now, but the path where we've come in terms of simplifying not just the day zero operations, but also, day two and other things. So why vSAN? Why can't we just go grab a traditional block array? Well, let's talk about traditional storage. Traditional block arrays, if you've worked with management, I was a storage admin for many years. They're based on this construct of LUNs. And they, we have a phrase we sometimes say on the podcast, LUNs suck. They've got a lot of problems in terms of you don't have necessarily equivalent visibility. They're their own little, from an operations standpoint, there's all these other steps that are involved in those arrays. So if we look at those arrays and what else involved in setting up, we've got to configure DNS, we've got to configure monitoring for those arrays. You've got to rack and stack them separately. They have their own HCL that has to be maintained of their own microcode or OS version. You have to manage security of how these LUNs are provisioned. So you've got fabric zoning, you've got additional devices, you've got additional lifecycle in the host for the fiber channel HBAs that you've got to manage separately. So if you look at this whole stack, you're potentially having to touch on multiple teams, multiple operations. This is just, and it's very much, you have to go to your storage admin and say, I need storage. And I want this, and what you're going to get is, this is what I got. Here are my LUNs. Here's the RAID that I already, chiseled into stone, and you kind of got to live with it.
LUNs suck.
One of the there we go. One of the other challenges of LUNs is that they're not really part of the. If we start talking about this hybrid cloud story where we stretch into the public cloud, they're not really public cloud ready in that regard. When we think of public cloud, we think of storage just magically appearing, and API, extra storage is an API call away. And if you look at our story, of what VMware is running in VMware Cloud on AWS, our premier public cloud offering, it's powered by vSAN, because we can't have the same storage arrays that you have in your data center in AWS. In regards to that, in this case, I've gussied up my storage array. I've put some cloud logos on it, but that's that amount of all the cloud washing in the world is not going to get me into public cloud in regards to this. And if we look at VMware Cloud Foundation and we look at the components of that stack, those are the same components that are going into VMware Cloud on AWS. They're also going into our 4,000 vCloud partners and our cloud provider program partners. And so from IBM SoftLayer, from regional players, guys like ZetaGrid and stuff like that, these guys are also running that stack. And so you've got a common stack. Even the announcement with Azure recently, we're going to be running, we'll have partners who are running VCF on Azure. So having one consistent storage platform across all of them is pretty powerful. And the other thing, which I already kind of hinted at, is that when we look at LUN operations, they're about the storage array, they're about what the storage is. They're not application centric. And what I mean by that is, how vSAN is managed. And if you've played with vVols at all, you'll see this also. They're managed through a framework called storage-based policy management. And you create policies and you assign them to virtual machines or templates or disks on virtual machines. And then it will go and say, okay, this performance, this availability, this RAID type, this security, maybe I'm doing VM encryption, something like that. I want this enforced, and it's going to go, so it's kind of like Star Trek, make it so, it goes and substantiates those capabilities to the lower level. And if it can't meet them, or there's a problem, maybe there's a failure, it gives you a real-time warning. If I consumed a regular data store from a LUN from a storage array, as a VMware administrator, I have to trust the storage admin to a degree that what I'm supposed to be getting is actually what's configured. And I can tell you as a storage consultant, there were many times that come into environments, and because of all these abstraction layers, the solution to all things in storage is another abstraction, I'd often discover that, the database volume that was supposed to be all flash and encrypted and replicated to 3 locations was sitting on my slow backup storage. And my backups were lightning fast, triple replicated and encrypted. So there's a lot of opportunities for miscommunication, for mistagging, misclarity, or just, failure awareness. If I'm having a performance problem and there was a failure in the environment and the storage side, as a VMware admin, you're blind to that. And as you get closer and closer and focusing on the application layer, you need something that can pierce through. And with vSAN, we have full visibility all the way to the individual drive level. We've got, logging events and things coming out of that for things like high latency times and stuff. We use Realize Operations. We can monitor an application stack. So let's take VDI here, or a database. We can look at individual transaction times, at the application level. But we can also look at the host. We can look at the switching. We can look at the actual individual drives and see what their latency is. If it's a VDI environment, I can look at client latencies, so I can actually see, what my PC over IP latency is for my remote devices. I can tell, Janet that, hey, it looks like you're on a bad connection. Or I can also see that, oh, I've got temperature alarms or health problems in my data center. Operations really need end-to-end visibility. So making storage about the application is something that as we increase our SLAs, as our operations teams need increasing visibility, this is something that just has to happen. And talking about
John, like you said,
yeah, go.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, John, you were talking about Janet in accounting. When she starts complaining about performance, the storage administrator doesn't have a lot of visibility either, because all he sees is a LUN, right? And that's just a file. So when she says that her application is not working, the storage administrator is going to blame the network, because all he sees is one big LUN file. So there's really limited visibility when your administrator is trying to talk to a.
Yeah, the visibility path up is quite bad. Pete, I think your audio is cutting out. So yeah, and that raises a point. The bottom up view is equally bad in that case. If I the storage admin and I just have LUNs, I don't even always know what the host is connected to. I just have a WWN. I don't know what virtual machines are running on those. I don't know what applications are. As we start disaggregating applications into microservices, and we have these multi-tier applications or these service meshes where we've got hundreds of different endpoints, I really have no clue what's generating that. It could be a legitimate important workload. It could be someone's running Monte Carlo simulations in Excel pointlessly. So you never really know. And so that visibility, and this gets back to another, how do we solve this problem? And what is the hyper-converged infrastructure and the SDDC bring here of having, one vendor to blame, one throat to choke across that IO path with monitoring and compliance and security taps and policy management? You need not just hyper-converged infrastructure, but you need a hyper-converged team. And so what you're doing here is, rather than having these silos of server, of operating system, of application, of networking, of security, of storage, all these separate disciplines and a separate guy, and that guy might go on vacation, or he might, if you're playing telephone, you're passing messages back and forth, it just becomes a finger pointing, blame game is what you're looking at, versus a hyper-converged team who has full awareness. You still have some some specialities. Some people may go farther down the networking or security path. But if we've got, one common interface, one common management, one common monitoring, all the way to the storage layer, we can actually have some visibility and some accountability. And rather than performance ghosts and goblins hide in your data center, for weeks or months, we can chase that stuff down. So talking about, what are some of the operational benefits? So I've got a screenshot here from VMware Cloud Foundation from the UI. And one of the challenges as we grow the complexity of these environments, we add all these extra components. Back in the day when it was just vSphere and that's all you had to patch, you're the vAdmin, it was, felt fairly simple. But as you start adding in increasing other areas of life cycle, you've got vSAN, which thankfully is integrated into vSphere. This actually makes it a lot simpler. There is no compatibility list between vSphere and vSAN. It's the same build versions. That massively simplifies, QA matrices and things like that. It's not like a storage array where you have to have a whole separate HCL just to compare. But the other benefits this is, not only the patching and upgrade cycles, you can download a single patch, but you can also, when you stand up environments, you can make sure those things get stood up and rolled out individually. These are called workload domains. They're kind of a construct here within the VCF LAN. And what our operations look like is, instead of having those little islands that Pete showed earlier of compute and storage that were all drifting in various versions and had a different management interface and possibly a different, owner, and would have required you summon the 4 or 5 teams that touched all the different components and align the planets, as I call it, to get those patched. you've got one dashboard that you can issue this from. You can see your resources across clusters. We recommend, as you see in this design here, a leaf spine architecture. So that way we've got really fast access between the racks. We can stretch layer 2 between them. So VM adjacency can cross racks in regards to that. And as we expand out, we start small. So we start with a single workload domain that is both holds the management components. And this is a minimum of 4 nodes. And as we expand out, we can break up into separate workload domains. Separate workload domains have their own vCenter servers. They have, they've got SSO linking in regards to that. So you still can do common management. And you can have separate clusters within those workload domains. Maybe you've got different business units, you've got different projects. Maybe you want to build a database cluster and consolidate licensing use there, things like that. You can spin those up in regards to that. And from an automation standpoint, it's not just, okay, we've got some servers, what we tell it to join this cluster. We have to go do a bunch of little small steps, stuff like the vSAN disk group bring up, adding licenses to hosts. If you've ever stood up hosts, there's a lot of hunting around in the UI. There is stuff that's kind of buried sometimes. You've got to set stuff on the, join it to the distributed switch. Maybe you need to configure a distributed switch if you're creating a new cluster. These automation help simplify those operations. It helps de-risk the environment because you're less likely to run into weird corner cases as you're going through. And it's this is a tested platform in this. And this also gives you visibility. You've got monitoring to those actions. So as we talked about kind of the hybrid cloud, let's talk about how we kind of tie this all together. So if we've got our existing, on-site, I've got my VCF here in the corner stack, but I also want to burst into the cloud. Maybe I've got some data that because of the gravity, it's in S3, I want to do processing on. Maybe I've got some workloads that need to burst up for testing at end of month, and then they scale back down to a small pilot light. For that, I'm going to add VMware Cloud on AWS. I've got, NSX, I can abstract networks between, so I can vMotion back and forth. And if I want to accelerate the movement, some real secret sauce that we have is called HCX. And HCX significantly increases the performance and the capability of migrating those VMs. HCX can also bridge back into older versions. So if you've got that 5.5 environment in the corner that you're like, how do I get everything off of this? How do I, this isn't even supported anymore. HCX can bridge in, can stretch layer 2 into that environment and help rip those workloads out. So this is some really cool secret sauce in helping with this mobility story. And getting these operations in a much more transparent way. And from, this isn't just, a platform for modern. This will help you get those old environments out. And this really gives this option for helping pay off that technical debt. If you haven't been patching for years, you haven't been doing the migrations, you've got these old environments, this is really a best in class, and this is going to build secure tunnels. This is going to do some significant performance acceleration and optimization on the WAN. They do some really cool stuff with multiple traffic engineering and optimizations. They accelerate that replication through compression and other capabilities. And this will do a differential push. So that way you can get yourself out of that debt. You can get that environment in the corner. I mean, I remember consulting years back, and actually not even that long ago, and I ran into an ESX 2.5 and an ESX 3 environment. And these things predated this stuff predated my entrance to working in the field. I started with 3.5. And they're like, well, it works, and we're kind of scared to touch it, and we don't even know how to get stuff out of it. Like, don't be that guy. Let's not be that guy. Let's get this stuff migrated, please. So I've talked about, some of the how VCF operationally integrates with vSAN. We've talked about how we're going to get stuff out of that old environment onto our vSAN powered public or private cloud. Let's also talk about some of the operations. So we talked about how the VMware admin didn't always have visibility in storage and vice versa. We've got this really cool program called vSAN Ready Care. And what we're doing is we're actually doing proactive phone home. So if you've ever worked with storage arrays, they phone home. It was like the first thing you set up. And it was kind of cool because, a drive died, something happened, had some visibility into that. The vSAN phone home is actually integrated into your support teams. And if you've got BCS or MCS who can do some proactive offerings or things like that, they can actually set up a dashboard of just your environment. So communicate with your BCS, MCS teams. And with that vCenter unique identifier, they can look at the health of your environment. They can look at changes. They can see not only the current state, but what it was like. If you think about your normal support call, it often involves this conversation that's fairly circular of, you call and they say, okay, send me the logs. And you send them the logs and they say, well, we saw something interesting, but you got any older logs? And you got some logs before that. And it's, imagine instead your environment, you're phoning home performance and health telemetry, so that way they can go look at the low level cache stats and things like that and see what really was happening 3 days ago. Because a lot of times by the time an issue gets raised or closed or a ticket gets opened, everything's back to normal, but we want to know why. We don't want ghosts in our data centers. We've got to get rid of those goblins and things like that. So having this ability to actually go back in time and see what was going on, this is really cool. And if you're running a traditional storage array and you had an interaction problem, you now have two different people you need to talk to. You need to talk to your storage vendor and you need to talk to hypervisor. And actually, if it could have been a fabric issue, so maybe you need to talk to your fabric vendor. Oh, and maybe there's an issue with the HBA. So the server, there starts to be a lot of people involved in root causing anything. And this is why we don't always do it. People just kind of give up sometimes and hope it doesn't happen again. But this is our storage platform. It's baked into the hypervisor, and we're able to do some really cool telemetry hooks and phone this home. Now, do note, by default, this doesn't phone home host names or anything identifiable in regards to that. This is just performance telemetry. So this isn't anything that anyone should be able to do anything evil with. But if you have questions and you want to do that, I encourage you to reach out to your vSAN SEs. They can explain how we can get better visibility into this stuff. And again, looking at this dashboard here, there's a new mode that we've actually created called network diagnostic mode. So previously we were doing, we do a minute-based roll-up on performance stats. What we actually learned was that we were running into cases to where on the networking side especially, stuff could happen for very short bursts. So there's actually this cool little checkbox here that if you check this turns on diagnostic mode and we get 1 second sampling telemetry. So this is really going to help you hunt down those goblins in the network stack and things like that. And we're constantly looking to improve this. So if you have any feedback, we're looking for that. So now I think we've got enough time. I'm going to go over to a product demo here. So we've got our SDDC manager dashboard here, and we can see that we've got 3 different workload domains. We've got the original management domain and then 2 subdomains. And let's go look at the workload. So we've got workload domain number 1. I can see memory usage is at 50%. I'm not using a lot of my storage, but let's say I know there's a bunch of big applications coming in and I want to expand this. So let's go take a look. We can see the hosts in it. I see I've got these hosts 5, 6, and 7. And then let's go look at our general pool of hosts. And we can see.
Hey, John, are you sharing your desktop?
I am not sharing my desktop. There we go. Thank you, Pete, for saying that.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to hear your voice, but I'd also like to see the demo, if that's okay.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, there we go. Oh, it disappeared. There it is.
Okay. So we're looking at our hosts, and we can see that we've got some unassigned hosts in this environment. And so we want to, we've got some spare capacity. So think of this instead of adding memory to a server or having to go add drives or have to go rack something. You can actually just keep some cold servers around that are ready to go. And so that way, if you've got multiple clusters and you don't really know who's going to be needing what, you can kind of treat them like a hot spare for an environment that you can add capacity. So we're going to go into our first workload domain. And note workload domains as we can have multiple clusters, and we can look here and we can say, okay, we want to add a host because we know there's a bunch more memory load coming into this. Some DevOps hipsters are going to build out a giant container farm, and we're grabbing one of those spare hosts to add that capacity. Now we can also see and make sure, okay, this was a hybrid vSAN cluster. Now, personally, these days I like all flash, but maybe this was a hybrid cluster, so we need to expand like for like. And I can see how much storage capacity I'm going to be adding. Now, rather than having to go call my SAN admin and have them create some volumes or add a shelf and then, have them expand volumes or add volumes and create zone groups, none of that's going on. Instead, as a VMware admin, I'm taking charge of the provisioning. And I can even add licensing, so I don't have to go hunt that down in the UI. I don't have to worry that, 30 days later, the trial is going to expire and I'm going to have problems. And we can see what's going on there.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we're going to pull up the task menu and we'll actually look at what's going on here. And let's expand this quite a bit. We can see that we're adding new hosts to the cluster, and you can also see some previous operations that have run this environment, like creating workload domains. And looking at this add host, you see all these steps that are going on. So it's creating the vSAN disk groups here. It's putting hosts in maintenance mode or in pulling them out, which is required to put them in a cluster. All these manual steps, making sure the host is connected to the vMotion network, validating that connectivity, setting up IP addresses. All of this is being automated. And so if we go into the host,
yeah, that's really impressive to see that whole list of tasks.
Yeah, well, and that's just the meta tasks. There's also subtasks within it. So we're going to jump actually into the vCenter for this environment. And note, I don't have to go figure out what the vCenter is. I can just click here on services, and I can see both the NSX manager as well as the vCenter. So I'm going to jump into that vCenter, and we're going to go straight to HTML5 because vSAN is in glorious, beautiful HTML5 here. We're going to go into our data center, into this cluster, and we see this host has been added. And you can see down here, you see some of the subtasks, like adding the virtual NICs and other options and things like that. That's actually all going on. So now at this point, we go back. We've expanded that workload domain. You can see the tasks that were happening here on that. And we can see that now of our 12 hosts, 11 are now in use. We only have one spare host. But this gives you the ability to do multi-manage workload domains, multi-manage clusters. This lets you have one holistic dashboard versus all those little crazy islands and those ever-expanding storage arrays in the corner that were going on here. And this gives you one, pretty quick workflow to be able to commission to expand capacity. And this also does, turn up of new environments. This also, again, we've got other cool integrations, like the ability to stand up our Horizon environment now. We can work with VRUPS. We can also, make sure Log Insight gets added to the host. There's also a composable infrastructure tab. So with some of our partners, we're actually able to automate some of the kind of host profiles and things that are done on for those new hosts for composable infrastructure, which is kind of like next generation blade architectures and things like that. So this is really the new commander of the data center, so to speak, if you will, in regards to that. So on that note,
that's really cool.
I've got something I want to plug here before we go to QA. Pete and I, we do talk a fair amount, and some of that talking is done at the vSpeaking podcast. This is a podcast that we've been doing now for 3 years, Pete?
I think 3 years. About 3 years, yeah.
We have over 500,000 downloads. We've got some great technical content on there. We actually have a podcast that'll be coming up next month, specifically on vCloud Foundation. So get excited. In regards to that, we've got some of the best brains and smartest people on there, some of our good friends across the industry. So use your podcast app, whatever you're using on your phone or on web, or go to vspeakingpodcast.com and sign up. And on that note, do we have any questions?
Let's get off the screen share.
Yeah.
You want to stop sharing your screen, John?
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
So it looks like Kevin, our good friend Kevin here, has really been answering some questions.
Well, one thing for sure is it's never pronounced vCloud Foundation. For those of you that are wondering, it's VMware Cloud Foundation. So I know that we in this industry, there's so many V's, right? We always get that discussion about, vSphere, V this, V that, vSAN, but it is VMware Cloud Foundation for those of you that are wondering.
I see we've got a question here on how the licensing works. This is licensed today per CPU. I've seen some questions about how do I test performance tools on various HCI solutions. The recommendation we have is HCI Bench. This is using industry standard VD Bench, as well as also it can use FIO tool in the new version. I encourage you to check out the new version HCI Bench. It's on the VMware Flink site. It has a really cool, they've got a new interface. There's actually Grafana dashboards in there. There's even a dark mode. Sometimes I call it goth mode, but it'll go and automate the work, create those virtual machines. please stop doing performance testing where you create one VM with a giant disk and try to test performance. That's not what anyone's data center looks like, unless your goal is to run a data center where you create a 12-node cluster and run one VM on it, which I guess you could do, but that would be really strange.
Hey, John, also somebody was talking about whether or not you can use HCI Bench for other solutions, for other HCI solutions. And so, yes, you can. And I would also add to that and say that if you're looking at other HCI benchmark tools, you just want to make sure what they're testing, because you want to be able to, because if you're looking at HCI is more than just testing I/O. I/O is important, absolutely, and latency is certainly important, but it's more than just latency. When you're talking about using SQL or other high processor utilization, you're going to want to make sure that you're testing CPU utilization, and HCI Bench does give you that ability. Other vendors, other HCI solutions might not do that, so you want to make sure, no matter which tool that you choose, you want to make sure what it's testing before you try to do a one-for-one comparison.
Yeah, I saw a great tweet by Christian Dickman this morning talking, who's one of our lead architects in engineering, talking about how anyone who's in the data path, their job is to move data as quick as possible and use as little CPU as possible. And if you can get an HCI system that produces 40 million IOPS per host, but it uses 98% of the CPU, congratulations, you have a storage array that you can run half a container on. So some other cool things with HCI Bench is you can actually run custom storage profiles. So while there are other ones that are built in there, it's VD Bench and FIO, so you can do custom manifests. There's a lot of cool ways, I encourage you to reach out to the SEs or the POC team. Those guys can help you identify what your actual workload looks like and test that. Because if you're doing, small block writes for VDI and you want to test 4 megabyte writes, that test is not indicative of what you're actually going to be doing. So there's some cool things you can do there.
And as far as collaboration, someone did mention VxRail, so I would say that we did do a podcast with Aaron Bewley and one of the lead engineers on VxRail and their support for VMware Cloud Foundation a couple of weeks back. So if you go to vspeakingpodcast.com and click on episodes, just look for the one for VxRail and VMware Cloud Foundation. And as we mentioned, that was just a touch of VMware Cloud Foundation. It was more of an emphasis on the VxRail solution, whereas one of our upcoming podcasts is actually going to be about a full deep dive on VMware Cloud Foundation specifically and all of the different pillars of that. So looking forward to that one.
I see some questions about kind of how you bootstrap this up. There's an OVA called Cloud Builder, and that basically helps stand up the environment. The Cloud Builder is really cool. You can when I was running it, I just ran it in Fusion on my Mac here, but yeah, you can run that on Workstation or use that, and that'll help you bring that up. I see some questions about trying to, is this going to be on demand? Yes, this should be on demand. There should be an email that follows up with that information. So I see a question about composable. So the composable integrations today, there's one of the major partners we have with that is HPE on the Synergy platform. And so we actually will speak Redfish to a proxy point that will then translate to their orchestration layer. So that way it'll help with, so to speak, summoning the composition of a server across the Synergy chassis. And that's an interesting angle because composable, I know Dell's got MX, you've got some other players that are coming out. This whole idea of disaggregation of servers or Gen Z, it's some kind of cool stuff because right now it's more just about disaggregating the storage and maybe some of the networking, but the longer term plans, if you look like the Gen Z architecture, is disaggregating even accelerator cards or CPU or memory. It's a really interesting field.
Oh yeah. I think that's it on questions. I don't see any new ones coming in.
I've got one here. Is it possible to upgrade a vSAN 661 cluster from a 6.5 vCenter to a new vCenter? It is possible to migrate vCenters with a cluster intact. William Lamb has a really good blog on this. But yeah, you can stand up a new vCenter and basically draft a cluster in. However, you won't be in that situation if you're using vCloud Foundation to manage your environments, because then the life cycle just be for vCenters is automated. So
yeah.
All right, I think
I
that's
do like
it.
that about
So, yeah,
VMware Cloud Foundation. Yeah, I was just going to say, John, I do like that about VMware Cloud Foundation. How when VMware Cloud Foundation is deployed, you don't just start going rogue and doing outside management. It actually it takes control of your environment, and it protects you from yourself, if you will. But it handles all of the maintenance, it handles all of the upgrades, and everything is done through SDDC Manager. So it's a really robust and safe way of managing your infrastructure. It's like having a public cloud service, but being able to do that with a private cloud. So I think it's a very, very unique offering.
Yep. All right. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, I'm lost_signal. Pete, you are
V Pedro Arrow.
And thank you guys for
we
coming
are
today.
at Vert Speaking. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Bye for now.